This is Daryl Ehrlich. I am the editor of the Billings Gazette. We are interviewing 7/31/2015 at 12:40 p.m. I've got Jim Abel in the studio with me. Jim, thank you for being here with us.
You're welcome.
To talk about your service in Vietnam. And so I think the best place to begin is at the beginning. If you can kind of tell me, let's go back to how did you begin your service, and where were you at the time before you went into the service, into the Army, right?
I was correct. I was going to school in Bozeman, Montana State University, graduated after winter quarter, I believe, and I had a student deferment, 2S deferment, which then was over. So I had basically a choice of being drafted or joining, and I figured I didn't really want to be in there all that long, so I let them draft me. I was drafted in May of 1969, and went to Fort Lewis, basic training, and assuming that I'm a smart guy, I've got a college degree, that I would be put into some kind of desk job. Graphic design. They called it commercial art in those days, but yeah, which I found out was worth almost nothing. But that's, I had a lot of fun. I had more fun in college than probably any other time in my life. But anyway, a friend of mine and I, we both graduated at the same time, went to the draft board to see where we were on the list. He was number 1 and I was number 2. And so we figured we're not going to be around long. Let's get a little beer, play a little basketball, and see what happens. So I was drafted first. He had a little issue on his record that they had to check and make sure he was okay to go.
Right.
And minor in possession thing, a year or so earlier. Anyway, went to Fort Lewis, basic training, and then they put me into advanced infantry training. They put me in infantry, which I found out later that's an indication that you're smarter than the rest of the guys.
Right.
One of the smart guys out there with guns and I guess.
And so that degree in commercial arts really was smart.
Yeah, it helped me in a couple of ways. After advanced infantry training, I was drafted again, this time into the non-commissioned officers school at Fort Benning, Georgia. I went to do that, and when I found out what it was, is they were training squad leaders, and I thought, I'm not crazy about this war. I'll go and serve. I have no problem with that. But I don't want to lead guys and have my troops getting killed. I kind of drew the line there, and I told them about it, and they said, well, you can drop out of this if you want, but you're going to go right to Vietnam. I said, that's fine. So I did. I dropped out, and, that was, I don't know, December maybe of '69, and, when 2 weeks later, I'm at Vietnam. And interesting flying out of Billings, Montana, and going to, I think we took off from Oakland, and flying to Hawaii, the Philippines, and then on into Vietnam. And all of a sudden, you're in a different world. This is get off the plane, and you've got guys getting ready to go home, and they're singing to us, "You're going home in a body bag, doo-dah, doo-dah." And so you're a little tense anyway.
Right.
And then I went into this is in Benoit, at the Air Force Base there, and I went in. I'd gotten my assignment to go to Tan An, and I sat down. And a guy sat next to me, and he was kind of in a uniform, but it was a different kind of camouflage and didn't look right. I expected maybe a British accent or something, but it wasn't. It was a guy who was a CBS News correspondent. And he had a gun, and he had 2 guns, and he wanted to know where I was going, and I said, Tan An. And he said, oh, Tan An, that's too bad. And you all kind of hit you. Now you don't see a toilet for 10.5 months. You get a shower in warm, dirty water when you get the opportunity. Food was awful.
Right.
But there was a certain amount of camaraderie, and went into some in-country training. Did that, and was being assigned to an infantry unit. And a guy shows up and says, "We want you to come talk to an officer." So okay, so I went, and it was what appeared to be an interview for a job. And the guy in front of me walked into this guy's office and stood at attention and saluted him, and so reporting for duty, or as ordered, or something like that. And I looked at the guy that he was talking to, this captain with no shirt on, cut off fatigue pants. His feet were up on the desk in a pair of sandals. And he had the best tan I've ever seen in my life. And I thought, the guy that's interviewing first is doing this wrong. And he was, "Yes, sir," "No, sir," and standing at parade rest and all that kind of stuff. And I just went in, shook his hand, and said, "I'm Jim Abel. What's up?"
Right.
And he's become a lifelong friend. He was at West Point captain, and he ran a finance department, and he wanted me to work for him. So I'm thinking, well, this is better.
Right.
And we were in Tainan for about 5 months. And there was some action, not a lot. We lost one guy. We had a couple other guys wounded badly. One of them died eventually, as he threw a clot and died after he got back to San Francisco. But it wasn't that bad. And making friends and doing your job. There's 7-day weeks. There's no days off, long hours, but time went by pretty quickly. And I look at it as a positive experience. I learned a lot about people, a lot of stuff about just life and what you take for granted when it's in front of you and after it's gone.
So help me with some of those examples. What do you think you appreciate because of that?
Well, we live in the best country on the planet. With its faults, it's the best country on the planet. And I've traveled a fair amount since then and seen some things that are pretty ugly. And some, New Zealand is great. If I was going to go someplace else, that's be where I'd go. But there are a lot of ugly things in this world, and people here, I think, don't get it. Not as much as they maybe ought to, or maybe just they're sheltered from it, but they've not been there, and they may never go. And I don't know that we're necessarily on the right track today, but it beats the guys in second place. Yeah. So were you born and raised in Billings, or were you born and raised in Montana? I was born in Washington State. My dad had been in World War II in the infantry, and he got a job working for the Bureau of Reclamation at Cooley Dam. That's where I was born. We moved around Washington a little bit, Idaho. He took a job with Kaiser, which people think of Kaiser Aluminum and Kaiser Hospitals. They were building cars in those days, and he was on the assembly line as a foreman, and watched his own car be built, which not many people get to do that.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
But his best friend, who he met going to basic training, was Tim Babcock, who later became governor, but he wanted to be in the trucking business. And he called my dad, said, "I bought a truck. I want to make something out of this. Would you come back and help me?" And so we packed up from, we were in the Oakland area at the time, and moved back here. And, he ran the trucking business for Tim for many years. Babcock runs as lieutenant governor, becomes governor when the governor's plane goes down. And so that's how I got here. I started in the 3rd grade here.
Okay.
My parents were from Lodgegrass when it was a nice little town.
Yeah. What was the? It must have been, as you said, not only a shock when you get off the plane and people are singing that you're going to come home in a body bag, but Vietnam's not a lot like Montana. It must have been.
No.
Or Bozeman.
Surprisingly cold at night. Not surprisingly, but very warm in the daytime. Humidity, unbelievable. Mosquitoes, awful. Rice paddies that would be full of water in high tide and empty at low tide. The people there, I think that was our first experience at being at war, where you didn't really know who the bad guys were. They weren't wearing uniforms. The NVA did, but we never saw them. The guys that we ran into were all Viet Cong, and they were in their black pajamas and as well as the whole rest of the population. But you didn't know who the good ones were or who the bad ones were.
Right. Is it when you hear that when you consider that you might not come home or that you'll come home in a body bag,
Mm-hmm.
and you've got that constant threat of not knowing who the good guys are and who the bad guys are? How do you deal with it? How do you go to work day to day?
Well, the reality is you're there and you're going to have to do your job, and you start. I think you kind of push it aside, and when something goes bang in the night, then it rushes in pretty quick. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we'd have some warnings, sometimes we wouldn't. A lot of silly things went on over there. The Viet Cong had, the group was around us had a recoilless rifle. We had heard they had one. And we would have the shells come in once in a while, and they were concussion grenades, which means the shrapnel is much bigger. So if you get hit with a piece of that, you're going to be in big trouble. And we had that happen a lot. And it was almost always at night. And so you didn't sleep very well. You inherit a fan, electric fan, from the guy who has gone home. And if you don't have that fan blowing on you all night long, the mosquitoes eat you. Doesn't sound like that bad a deal, but it was awful. And then the loud noises at night, probably every couple of weeks. They would get hold of things that they shouldn't have gotten hold of, mortars, tear gas. Having to put a gas mask on and try to sleep with it on, you can't. You'll suffocate. Somewhere at home, I've got an audio cassette that someone turned on one night, just so if we did get hit, we'd hear about it. We'd be able to have that as a piece of history. And somewhere I've got that. I haven't seen or heard from it for quite some time, but as I recall listening to it, I mean, it just brings it right back. When I came back here, I was at dinner with a friend. His wife was gone somewhere, and he's barbecuing, and we're sitting at the little table in the kitchen, and somebody set off an M80 or something pretty close outside, and I was under the table. And my friend Chuck, he's going, "What are you doing?"
Right.
And I mean, you adapt, I guess, would be my very long-worded answer to your question. You just adapt to what is in front of you, and you just have to deal with it.
Are there certain sights, though, I mean, and obviously an M80 going off, are there certain sights, sounds, things that tend to bring it back for you? I mean, that you all of a sudden find yourself transported?
Used to be. I still don't like loud noises, a backfire or whatever, but I'm not hitting the ground anymore.
Right.
Yeah, it comes back. I used to have dreams once in a while. I haven't had one for a long time. I remember when we were told we were going home, they were doing early outs. Nixon had wanted to get everybody out of there and get guys out of the Army and off the payroll, I think. And we went back to Long Binh, and we didn't know when we were leaving. You just be ready to go, be ready to go, be ready to go. And what little sleep I got, I kept dreaming the same dream that I was physically blowing up. And it got almost silly. You wake up and you're having that dream and you're going like, okay, I'm going to be out of here one way or another in a day or two.
Yeah.
Just relax. You couldn't do anything. You couldn't go anywhere. You're sitting there with your duffel bag ready to go. And one morning they came and said, here you go. Take off. All these guys, can't remember if we got in Jeeps or how we got to the plane, but it was a commercial aircraft. And we got in it, and there were flight attendants, stewardesses then. And it was just so surreal. You're in dirty, grimy fatigues. Haven't had a shower for a couple of days. Don't even know, I can't even remember eating anything. But getting on that plane, and it was dark. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, as I recall. And they fired it up, and they taxied out, and there wasn't a sound from anybody. And they started their takeoff run, and it was just completely silent except for the engines. And when you could feel the wheels come off the runway, it was everybody just screaming, yes, we made it. And then 30 some hours later, I was out of the Army and on a plane to where my parents were living then was New Mexico. And I'm back in the country. I made it. And I spent 30 days laying on a couch in my mother's living room, having the TV on, but not even watching it, just decompressing.
Let's talk about that, because one of the things that people talk about is whether they were in combat or just because the entire country was at war, coming back and being plunked down into to life normal. Many people had just gone on as it had for the last year or two.
Yep.
That was a pretty hard transition. What was it like for you?
Well, and they didn't like anybody that had been to Vietnam. It was so unpopular. In order to fly for free on a military thing, you had to wear your uniform. Didn't want to wear my uniform. Matter of fact, when I came into Oakland, knowing I was going to Vietnam, I was in dress greens, and I'm walking through the Oakland airport, and there's 2 Hare Krishnas with the orange robes and the funky hair and the little ponytail thing. And I didn't deliberately go close to them. There was a crowd in there, and when they saw me, they started screaming "baby killer," and one of them spit on me. And I had never been I had not been there yet. I was going there.
Right.
So I was really tuned into not being in the Army. When I was out, the uniform went away, and it never made a big deal out of having been anywhere.
Right.
If somebody asked me, I was honest about it, but I just certainly didn't bring it up.
How has that, what you went through in 1970, now fast forwarding to 2015, how do you look back at that now? I mean, how do you, there's been time, there's been history, and there's been your life experience. How do you view it now?
Well, people have asked me that before, and I think it's an honest answer to say it was a great experience. I wouldn't want to do it over again. You learn a lot about people. All of a sudden, you're thrown into a mix of people from every part of the United States. We had a guy in our unit from Jamaica, and you start finding out the difference in the way people are brought up, how they live, compared to how I've lived. And I always said that if my parents had ever made a mistake, it was that they had never really let me be exposed to the seed year. That it was Ozzie and Harriet land. I mean, there was no such thing as divorce in my family. Mom stayed home and cooked and took care of the house and took care of the kids. Dad was out working. That was Ozzie and Harriet land for me. So when I started finding out that the rest of the world was not made up of that many Ozzie and Harriets, it was hugely cluing me into the way the world really is. And, I'm very thankful for having been brought up in a solid family unit. But it would have been probably valuable for me to know that not everybody does that. I remember a third grade teacher telling me, or telling the class, that 10% of everybody in the United States has an emotional disease. They have emotional problems. And I just thought, no way. That's crazy. It can't be 1 in 10. Come on. And then you find out that maybe that number isn't as high as it ought to be.
Right. Yeah.
My first wife, from a family that was completely dysfunctional in every sense of the word. I didn't see it. Not soon enough, anyway.
Right.
And that was a growing up lesson too. But that was after Vietnam.
How do you go from that Ozzie and Harriet kind of idyllic life to somewhere? Not only now are you under stress because it's a war zone, you're in an army and you're in a war that you may not necessarily love. Not that I think anybody says, "Hey, I love war," but that you may have some questions and misgivings about. And then now you have to also find yourself adapting to a whole bunch of things that you may not have been exposed to. That seems like that's pretty heavy, a lot to adjust. How did you make that adjustment?
You just have to do it. I mean, there were guys in my basic training unit that couldn't do it, and they were booted for one reason or another. There were guys in my basic training unit that would go do this testing. They'd hand out a little booklet. First thing you had to do was open it, put your name on the inside, and then go do the test. And when time was up, then you close the book. And we had guys that never got past writing their name in the front, and that was real. IQ 80. I don't know. I had no idea that there were people that were that challenged, that looked okay. I had been in school with some challenged people, so I knew that was out there, but not at the level I saw in the Army.
Yeah.
And where these guys were coming from was just amazing. And a lot of them were from the South, the Deep South. And a lot of them just couldn't do it. And then there are the guys that want to challenge authority all the time. And I'm the kind of guy that, I figured out pretty fast that I don't want to be on the commanding person's list. I'm just going to be in the background. If they want to be idiots and get what you get as a result, good. I'd rather them than me.
Right.
But then they look at my records and they say, okay, we want you to be a squad leader. We want you to, and so you do it. And until it got to the point where I was going to have to lead a rifle squad. And you go through training at Fort Benning, Georgia, and you're out in the daytime with all your stuff, and you're looking for tripwires, and you're going across mowed lawns. And you're looking for there's no tripwires. Or if there was, at least you'd see it and you'd step over it. You get to Vietnam, the grass is up to your shoulders. What do? Do you not go in there? No, you have to go in there. Well, somebody's going to trip something. I tripped one once. It was a hand grenade, an American hand grenade, that was in a sea ration can. The pin had been pulled. He hit the wire, pulls it out.
Boom.
Doesn't go boom. It's rusted. It just sits there. But, the day before, who knows?
Yeah.
And it's one of those, if your time comes, it comes, I guess. I had one good college friend who was killed in Vietnam, and he was in the infantry, and he should never been in the infantry. He's the kind of guy that get to the pull-up bar, and he'd just grab hold, and his face would turn red, and he'd drop. He just had no muscle tone. He had no muscle tone at all. And how he got into an infantry unit, I can't imagine how that could happen. But he did, and he was killed. Don't know the details. I owed him $5. And his name is on a memorial in Missoula, and there was a $5 bill stuck in there many years ago.
Do you have does the fact that you came home and his name's on a wall, what does that do?
Goosebumps.
Sure.
I don't feel guilty that he got it and I didn't. I wish he had made it too. I'm glad I made it. I wish he had made it too. I had a guy I played baseball against, Frank Garcia, that was killed over there. But he was an athlete, and he was doing what I would have been doing. He was leading a squad, and I didn't know then that he was going to be killed, of course. But when I heard about it, I thought, So yeah, Larry Ingebretson and Frank Garcia knew them both very well, and they're both gone. And it's a shame, and especially a shame since we didn't do anything to win that war.
Yeah. Let's talk about, you said, when you went in, you weren't, and I'll paraphrase, so if I get it wrong, please tell me. You weren't real keen on the war. How does someone go, because we've heard people who went to Canada, we've heard people who were conscientious objectors, I've heard those stories, but how do you not believe in a war and go and fight for it?
Well, I was not a conscientious objector, and there were some guys who claimed to be that weren't, and there were some that were sincere about it. I knew guys that went to Canada. I couldn't do that. I live in the best country in the world. My dad was in the Battle of the Bulge, one of the first guys that crossed the Remagen Bridge. He lived through it, and I figured it was my duty to go try to live through it too. So yeah, I did. I was not going to run. I hoped I would get in and out of there in 2 years and move on. I was in and out of there in 18 months, and I moved on.
Right.
And I'm grateful every day that I'm here.
Yeah. What do you remember about sight, sound, smell? It seems to me that a lot of the memories that people have are sensory, which makes sense because they're how we perceive the world. What do you remember? What are some of the things that you remember? Because I think when people like me look back, we look back at historical tapes or photos, and those are somewhat flat and monolithic. But for people who were there, those sights and sounds and smells and all that are very real. You've shared some of them, loud percussive blasts. What are there others that are either I don't want to say triggers, but remind you, hearken back to that?
Well, I think if you ask. Anybody you ask would have to at least have this in their head. Human waste was you pooped into part of a 55-gallon drum that was cut off, and then the Vietnamese guy that was hired to do so would come in, pull it out the back of the latrine, put some diesel fuel in it, and burn it. That's a smell you're not going to forget.
I bet so. We
would go in as part of a finance platoon, I guess, we would have to go pay guys in our unit, 3rd Brigade of the 9th Infantry Division. So there'd be a number, and we'd go to Long Bend in a Jeep and with a footlocker, and we'd go to where they had the military payment certificates, because you couldn't have real money over there. And they'd give us the money, and it would basically fill up a footlocker. And then we would get in a helicopter and fly back. Flying back in the little bubble copter, I called them, Loach, I think is what they called them, you see all these little ponds everywhere. And, being from Montana, you say, so what are those little ponds all about? Well, that's where we dropped ordnance. Every one of those is a crater. And, wow. And on the drive in, you'd see bombed out buildings, burned out buildings, buildings that were made of stucco, that the bullet holes are just, you'd see, almost invariably, you'd see at least one Viet Cong dead up alongside the road, swollen up, purple. They were making a point. This is what happens. And, those are the kinds of things you don't forget.
Yeah. Are there,
The sound of a mortar round going off, you feel it before you hear it. All the air is sucked away from you, and then there's the boom.
Huh.
And if you go into a club that has the big woofers blaring, okay, times 10, it just thumps you, and then the kaboom. And so and everything slows down. You go way into slow motion when it happens. The first time we got hit, we had a projector, and we were showing a movie projected on the side of a bunker. So we're laying in the sand with a Pabst Blue Ribbon or whatever it was,
right,
and watching this movie. And this, the first time I experienced it, the air all rushes away from me, then boom. And so I'm looking for a place to go, and there was a Jeep-like unit pretty close by, so I went and dove under it. We all had M16s, but generally they're in the locker. So when they decided everything was clear, and I come out, this officer came over to me and says, "That's the worst place you could have gone. That thing gets hit, you blow up with it. Don't do that again." So, and was there any training about that? Never. None. The training was all about how you kill the bad guys, not how you survive the bad guys. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, the practical experience was something else.
So where do you go when you? So what is so the wrong answer? Did they ever give you the right one?
No, it didn't really give me the right answer. We had in 10N we had, I think it was 10 bunkers, and so you could go into one of those. There were a couple of bigger ones that we went to when it really got dicey. We'd all grab our guns and we'd go down in and around these bunkers. We had one night we got hit, and two of the officers in our unit decided they were going to crawl across the street to get to the bunker, and in so doing, they had shorts on. They scratched their knees, and they got Purple Hearts for that. And we had to stand in formation and watch these guys get their Purple Hearts. Where, what's his name, Housey, that got his foot blown off, yeah, he probably got a Purple Heart too, but I think he deserved his.
Right.
And he died.
So, what was when you take that kind of fire and you have to go on a bunker? What's being in a bunker like when that's going on?
Well, you're waiting for somebody to come in the bunker and start shooting at you, so you're ready to shoot back. And I never had that happen to me. Most of the stuff that we got hit with, I now call it terrorist. They were scaring you. They were going to scare the hell out of you. These recoilless rifle rounds killed one guy in 5 months. But they scared the hell out of us all the time. We had a guy in a bunker. Once a week you'd go out and you sit on a bunker all night long. 2 guys, one asleep, one awake. Unless both were asleep, and that was a bad thing.
Right.
And one night there was a guy in the bunker across from us that they found dead in the morning. His partner woke up. Here's the guy sitting in the chair with a bullet hole. No powder burns. But he had written letters to his parents saying he was not feeling good about this thing. He was really depressed, yada, yada, yada. So they communicated with maybe the Red Cross to start with, but it got back to the major or lieutenant colonel that was running our unit. And we're worried about our son, and he shows up dead. Like, it just happened the same time, so they decided to call that a suicide. Although it had rained that night, and they'd found the outline of a human form out in the rice paddy in front of him that was dry. They didn't recover the bullet, but there was no powder burns. So typically, if you shoot yourself, you're going to get the powder burn, and he didn't. And I don't know how that. I was telling my wife about that the other night, and I don't know how it turned out, because you just don't know.
Yeah. So it's the psychology of it that's almost as bad, or maybe worse in some respects, than the actual horror of combat. It's the messing with you. I think
they're equally bad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there, now looking back on it, there are whole genres of movies and television and song and then fiction and nonfiction about Vietnam. But that's happened with World War II as well. But are there movies or literature or television that you've seen regarding Vietnam that you say, yeah, that resonates with me?
Mel Gibson did one called We Were Soldiers that probably got it better than any of the rest. Kubrick did one. I'm forgetting the name of it.
Is it Johnny Got His Gun?
No. Anyway, it starts, it is a basic training thing and carries these characters to Vietnam and through Vietnam. And he got the basic training thing right. Apocalypse Now got some of the Saigon stuff right. It was a commerce thing. You could buy anything, you could sell anything. You see the little roadside stand with spears of pineapple for sale. And they were not really interested in selling the pineapple. They had heroin-laced pot. They had all kinds of stuff. A lot of guys were really interested in selling their virgin sister to you.
Mm-hmm.
We had GIs that would take a truck into town and sell it, and then say it was stolen, and they'd go and they'd get it back, but he still had the money. A lot of guys were enamored of the women over there. I mean, I wasn't going there.
Right.
And they say, well, after a while they start looking pretty good. And I said, not really.
Yeah.
I can wait.
Yeah.
And I see, even today, you see a guy once in a while with what appears to be a little Vietnamese wife. And, life hasn't been good to either one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. When you look back on now, I mean, this year marks the 50th anniversary since we sent U.S. combat troops. There were people there before, obviously, but when you look back, how does now the benefit, if such a term can be used, of time, how does that change how you view, or how do you view the war now with a little bit of time and space between your experience?
I think that if we were not committed to winning that war, we shouldn't have gone. That's pretty simple. Mm-hmm. We got involved. We made it appear that we were going to try to win the war, but they were not willing to pull a trigger. They just weren't. And it was so polarizing. And, I know some people in the media that were there and did some things they probably shouldn't have done, and talked to them about it after the fact. And so what do you think of what I did? That kind of thing. And I think you were used. And they don't really want to hear that. The egos are a little big for that.
Yeah. Do you think, is there some of the Vietnam veterans who came back, obviously, and are here today, are talking about seeing similarities and then differences with the veterans who are coming home today? They can see it in both terms. Do you see those things, and if so, what are they?
Aside from the difference in the equipment that we carried then and what these guys are carrying now, I think it's exactly the same. And exactly the same. We're not willing to win anything. So when you look at Iraq, it's Vietnam all over again.
It must be hard for someone who lived through Vietnam to see us to do that again then?
Yeah, it's very hard. Why are you doing the same thing over again?
Right.
It didn't work the first time. How do you figure it's going to work this time? And, it's different administration, different philosophies. Scares the hell out of me.
Yeah. When people look back, not just now when we're doing this 2015, but let's say when they look back in another 50 years, when they're celebrating 100 years, mm-hmm. Not celebrating, that's probably the wrong term, but remembering, what do you hope people know about Vietnam or remember as it pertains to your experience too?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think people are going to remember it. I think people are willing just to let that go as a bad thing. And you look at the way history is being taught today. I don't think we're going to learn much about Vietnam in 50 years. I don't think it's going to be a blip on the radar. And so is Iraq. And who knows what's next? I don't know how or why, but we've been in pretty serious jeopardy for a number of years, and for whatever reason, the attacks have been few and far between. And I think the potential for the bad guys to get us is huge.
Yeah.
I don't think, maybe we are ready, but if we are, we don't know what it is they're doing. And maybe that's okay, as long as they're not being able to be effective in their terrorist. These one-off things where a guy goes and tries to get inside a base and kill everybody that's in front of him. That's one thing. But there are other things that are far worse than that they must have stopped.
You hope, yeah. I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier. You said, I spent the first month on my mother's couch in New Mexico, not really watching television, but it was on. What caused you to get up off that couch?
My mom said, you need to get up, you need to go back to Montana, and you need to get on with things.
Wow, that's a tough mother's love, right?
I called the U-Haul van person the next day and rented a van, put my stuff in it, and drove up here. no job. I had worked summers at the highway department, so I applied there and got on. Summer gets over. I was too proud to file for unemployment insurance until I was completely broke, and then I did. But at that point in time, I took a job with Kmart, management training program, and just kind of went from there. Not what I wanted to do, but I had to do something.
Right.
For $650 a month. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So how was, one of the interesting things is even coming back to a place like Montana, vets talk about their experiences, their reintegration differently. Some it seemed to be seamless, some it was rocky, and some even say they haven't fully, that integration process isn't fully complete. What was it like for you after that, and how did Vietnam shape or not shape the rest of Jim Abel's life?
Well, honestly, I don't believe I would have done anything differently. I don't think there was anything about Vietnam that turned me a different direction. Mm-hmm. It was a learning experience. It was something I did. As I said earlier, I thought it was a great experience. I wouldn't want to do it again. It didn't stop me from doing anything. I can't think of anything that it encouraged me to do. I was happy to be out of the Army. I was happy to be safe, and I had a chance to, start then and do something. And I started, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew. Well, I found out the hard way. Then I went and interviewed for a job as a graphics person, and it was $2.25 an hour. And so I took the $650 a month gig at Kmart instead. Mm-hmm. And I did that for 6 years, and then I was able to get out of that and do something else. So
right. I guess those are all good things too. What do you? Was there? And I learned this question probably from just a lot of others. One of the things that it seems to be big with a lot of the memories of Vietnam, but also for people is some of the music of the time. Mm-hmm. There are songs or groups that for almost every vet seem to be this was either something I heard a lot and I can't hear that song without going back, or became a personal anthem for me. Did you have the same experience?
Not exactly. I was in Tan An, Vietnam, when I heard that the Beatles were breaking up.
Okay.
And that was, I was a big Beatle fan, so I didn't want that to happen. But the funny, I've seen McCartney twice. I saw him in Missoula last year, and it really does do something to you to hear the music that you were so drawn to then, 45 years later, and have it still do the same thing to you, and remember where you were when you were hearing some of that music. We had bands available to us. We had when we moved from Tan An, they were sending the colors home, so we all got split up. So we decided we'd have a big party. So we bought a whole bunch of steaks and a whole bunch of beer, and had a 2-day party. It had an Australian band one night, and we had a Vietnamese band, or maybe a Filipino band the second night. And I mean, it wasn't much different than being in Bozeman.
Yeah.
I mean, the atmosphere is a little different, but the elements of the party elements is like, okay, I am on the other side of the world, but if I was at home, I'd want to be doing the same kind of thing.
Right.
And that was part of the commerce thing too. We, paid a lot of money for all that stuff, and that was great. We had a blast, and then we went on to different places. But I had this captain that hired me. I hadn't seen him or talked to him for 30-something years, And I had a wild hair one day, and I got on the internet and looked him up by name, thinking I might be able to find an address or a phone number. And I got the address, the phone number, a picture of his house,
Right.
in New Jersey. And I just called him, and he answered the phone. I said, Duke. And he goes, yeah? I says, Jim Abel. He says, holy. And he came out here. We spent a week here seeing Montana, seeing Yellowstone, all that kind of stuff. And then he had me come back, and we toured New England together. And that's a friendship that happened because he needed a guy to run his cash operation, and I had a college degree. And we talk frequently, and it's
so those kind of those cemented some pretty deep friendships.
Well, that one in particular, I had a black friend in Tanan that he knew I played baseball, and he said, well, do you have a glove? And I said, no, it's in Montana. I said, well, have your parents send it to you. So my glove comes to me, and we would go out and we'd just throw the ball around. And, I'm throwing a curveball, and he's telling me how badly I'm throwing it and what I'm doing wrong. So he taught me how to throw a curveball correctly. So I thought we were pretty tight, and he gave me his number when he left. And when I got home, I called, and his mother apparently answered the phone, and I asked if Freddie was there, and she says, yeah, and you could hear her say, some guy named Jim Abel calling. And I won't quote him, but he wasn't interested in talking to me. Very, very odd.
Right.
10,000 miles away, we were really close. Here, 1,500 miles away, not going to have anything to do with me.
Wow.
And you saw that division a lot. I can't say that there was a bad racial thing going on over there, but every black guy had to have some physical contact with every other black guy, and none of the white guys. And it was just bizarre. And I mean, what's wrong with me? Why can't I be part of this conversation? I mean, they were not hostile to me. They just didn't want to include me, which I found odd.
Right. Huh. What when you think about when you were over there, do you remember what you missed, or was there something that you said, I miss this about Montana, or I miss this about home, or I miss this one creature comfort? It's odd, but this is what I found myself appreciating.
No.
Okay.
No. It was just a different time, a different place. I know I'm there. I have to adapt to this. If I'm lucky, I'll get through this thing. So I'm just going to go about my business, be as safe as I can, try not to do anything stupid.
What was the everyday? Give me an idea of what the routine, because if you're working 7 days a week, I think that when we think about people serving over there, we think about, we think in terms of movies and stuff, and it always being breakneck speed and really a lot of action. But that may not have been, that may not leave the right impression. What was a day in the life for you, and what was the routine?
You're up early, you go to work early, you do your job. Biggest thing I did was I wrote treasury checks. Guy'd come in, he'd get paid, and he'd buy a treasury check to send home to his parents or whatever. And so at the end of the day, after I've taken all this money and filled out all these forms, then I would get out the checks at night. It was a U.S. government treasury check, and I had a stamp with our major's signature on it, and I'd type up the $160 check, $200 check, the address, put it in the mail, and away it goes. The guy before me, I found out later, was doing the same thing, except he was sending some of these to himself.
Oh.
And he ended up in Leavenworth. And, I wasn't going to do that. It was funny they didn't tell me about that until after it was almost done. Hope you're not
doing like he did, right?
Because he's in Leavenworth. So, I was sitting in a cash cage all day. People would come in with the money they were paid, and they'd buy treasury checks, and I'd type them up at night. And after 5 o'clock, it was okay to have a beer if you wanted to. A guy over there had bought 3 refrigerators, and he'd done 2 terms. And he made enough money selling beer and colas to buy a bar in Boston when he got done in 2 years. He made enough money to do that.
Wow.
At, $2 a beer or $1 a beer, whatever it was. Weekends were the same as a weekday. Once a week you'd sit all night in a bunker. Seems like it was once a week. You'd have bad food 3 times a day. Sometimes we'd go into Saigon, sometimes we'd go into Long Binh. There was a little, I can't remember the name of the little town. They had a club in that you could go get Vietnamese food, and you had to go as a group. You just never knew what was going to happen over there. And, I usually go to bed about 9 o'clock at night. Went back one morning to find my desk had been blown up.
Wow.
All the papers that had been sitting in a stack, a piece of shrapnel had cut through it this way. And just a real mess. That was the night the guy got shot in the ankle, or got shrapnel in his ankle.
Was there a certain joy in the routine?
Well, it was one day closer to being home. So, yeah, beyond that, I can't say that.
Was, obviously the ration, horrible food. Was there, when you would go out on the excursions, whether they would be to Saigon or Long Binh, was the food any better out in the field?
Yeah. Yeah, I rarely have Vietnamese food here because it isn't nearly as good as the Vietnamese food in Vietnam.
Right.
Loon Phoon's was a restaurant we'd go to. And it was a big place, probably sat 200 people. And the food was amazing. You didn't really want to ask what it was.
Yeah.
The rivers, the Mekong River the people would use the river as the outhouse, and there's certain species of fish they call shitfish,
right,
and accordingly, and we would on occasion be told that we're having shitfish.
Pretty.
It was good, but
right.
Yeah.
You had to do a certain amount of there's some mental gymnastics to get through that one, I would imagine.
I always wonder what I brought home with me,
Right.
What kind of bugs are living inside me that weren't there before.
Right. Yeah.
Although, I'm 60, I'll be 69 next week, and seem to be in pretty good health. So.
Yeah. I hope to be as good as 69 as you are, Jim. What am I missing? What haven't I talked about that it's hard for someone to interview someone about a war that I didn't experience or wasn't there? Have I missed?
Well, I hope I've given you something that you haven't heard from somebody else, but I'm gonna stick with my story. It was a great experience. I wouldn't want to do it again, and that's because you don't know how the outcome is going to change. Duke and I have talked about there are tours that you can go back and see where you served in Vietnam, and we've talked about not taking the tour, but going, somehow getting there and going where we want to go. Just as 2 Americans, and get a guide. And I don't know if we'll ever do it or not, but we talked about it. It would be kind of fun.
Yeah. So it seems like there's a couple of camps. One camp says, I don't want to go back. Mm-hmm. Others say, I need to go back. You're somewhere in the middle there?
Yeah. I don't need to go back. I think it'd be kind of fun to do it.
Yeah.
I certainly, if I had if the opportunity jumped up and said, we want you to go back, here's a ticket, I'd go.
Right.
It's a beautiful country. I never got very far north, but China Beach is just amazing. And I'm sure it's quite a tourist attraction now.
Is it hard to be in a place that's beautiful? I mean, you grew up in Montana, so you went to Bozeman, so a lot of beauty here in Billings. What did that ever strike you as, you're in this place that a few of people have said every once in a while they got this realization that this is a pretty place. Mm-hmm. How odd that we're at war, this is a pretty place. Did thoughts like that cross your mind, or is it just so much just keep your head down and survive another day?
I can appreciate the beauty of it. I never dwelt on it. It was a different kind of, this is a tropical paradise. Just happened to have a war going on. And we'd have to get a haircut once every week or two, and the guy that cut our hair was Vietnamese, and he was a concessionaire, they called him, worked for the PX. And he'd cut our hair, and he always wanted to do the straight razor on us, and that was okay, I'd let him do that. And then he wanted to do a little chiropractic thing on your neck, and I was not going to let him do that. And I remember we were getting hit fairly regular, and we had these, we called them hooch girls, that come in and they clean up our bed stuff and everything. And I went back as they were leaving one night, and she says, "You be careful tonight, GI." And I'd heard of them saying that to others before, so I, paid a little more attention than I would otherwise, and we got hit that night. They knew it was coming. And flipping back to the first part of my story, somebody said, "Did you hear about whatever the guy's name was, Trang?" And I said, "No." He says, "Well, we got him last night. He was the guy with the recoilless rifle. He and some others, and they'd sent a squad out, and they took him out. He was the guy with the straight razor shaving my neck, and everybody else's."
Wow.
Very strange.
Yeah.
At night, he's killing us. In the daytime, he's got a knife to our throat.
And you didn't know it.
Didn't know it.
That's a certain kind of psychological warfare. I mean, and what you can probably argue whether that's intentional or not. I mean, if you're in on the end to do that probably gave him great advantage. But that's got to be something that's hard to reconcile, finding that out.
Yeah.
How do you take that and not just be distrustful of everybody?
Well, I think I've learned to, if somebody does something bad to me, I'll never let them do that again. I may give them another chance, but if it's going to be in the same situation, I don't want to go there. Mm-hmm. And I make it pretty clear to them that's not going to happen again. I think I'm a pretty trusting guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm always surprised when you hear something that counters that goes against that. Really?
Right.
She did what? Said what?
Right.
And I've had that happen. I had a production company in Billings years ago, and I had a bunch of employees, and some of them were, I trusted them, and they were not doing the right thing. And when I figured it out, and figured out how bad it was, I decided I think I'll just go do this on my own. And that was in 1995, and I've been doing it on my own ever since.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I really Jim, I can't thank you enough for the time you've taken, and I want to thank you for your service.
Thank you. Glad to do it.